Hello, this is Vlad and a new story from my channel, Amazing Stories. Serioza, today is, so to speak, your first anniversary. 10 years old. This is a very important date. I wish you to grow up big and strong, but also remain as kind, smart, and inquisitive as ever. Happy birthday! The children shouted in unison. Elisa smiled. Perhaps her speech hadn't been as good as she'd planned, but that wasn't the most important thing right now. What mattered was that all the other details of the celebration had been a success. The cake, the decorations, and the other orphanage residents happily supporting her initiative. But for Serioza, this congratulation was a complete surprise, just as she'd hoped. The birthday boy devoured the cake with gusto, but for some reason kept glancing at the door. Moreover, Elisa had the unpleasant feeling that the boy was growing gloomier with each passing minute. He'd been happy since the morning, as any child probably would be on their birthday. But, oddly enough, as the party progressed, his expression grew increasingly puzzled and distant. Is something wrong? Alice finally couldn't take it anymore. The child had been staring at the door for a good 10 minutes. Hearing the teacher's voice, he couldn't even immediately focus on what she'd said. His gaze seemed unfocused, and he only responded after a pause. Thank you, everything's fine. But something seems to be bothering you, she persisted. Tell me, it'll make you feel better, and maybe I can even help you with something. Well, don't do this so that something spoils your celebration. Quote. Yes, I was just waiting for someone, Serioza said hesitantly. Who, I wonder? Alice asked warily. I just know that I have relatives who are supposed to pick me up from here, and I thought it would happen today, on my birthday, but no one came. And why do you think she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud? I just know, the boy replied. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get anything better. In the end, she gave up. Well, who knows what kind of fantasies an orphan boy his age might have. Of course, he would want, like in a fairy tale, some long-lost relatives to show up for his most important holiday. She couldn't give him that, of course, but she could do something else, perhaps less fantastical, but quite pleasant. She wanted to tell him about it later. But now, seeing the child suffering, she decided there was no point in delaying. You know what? Alice said in a mysterious tone. I don't know anything about your relatives, but I was thinking about taking you home with me. How would you feel about that? Quote. Your eyes widened, Serioza. Are you serious? Quote. Alice nodded. The boy looked at her with obvious suspicion, as if he thought it was some kind of prank. And the teacher again began to suspect that something was fishy. It seemed that someone really had given the boy false hope. But who? Why? Whoever it was, he was no longer ready to simply believe in his happiness. Well, have I ever deceived you? Alice asked seriously. Serioza thought for a moment, as if he was genuinely trying to remember if such a thing had happened, but it seemed he couldn't find a single episode in his memory, and yet he wasn't entirely sure. I don't think so, he responded, confused. Are you really going to take me home? Well, not right now, Alice answered honestly. But I hope quite soon. I've almost finished all the preliminary preparations, and there's only one thing left. Would you like this? Yes. And a certain resigned confidence sounded in Serioza's voice. It seemed that, if he didn't believe it, he was still hoping. Like any child in such a situation, what he wanted most was to leave the orphanage and find himself in a loving and caring family. Elisa had indeed been thinking about adopting him for quite some time. She'd liked the boy from the very day she started working at the orphanage. And now almost everything was ready. Just a few formalities remained, and that was it. She could safely take him in. Only one thing truly worried Elisa: her own husband, and how exactly he would react to the arrival of a fully formed child. She'd told him more than once that she wanted to adopt a boy from an orphanage, but the response she'd always heard was something like, "I'm not going to raise strangers. If you feel so sorry for these orphans that you're going to drag them into your home like stray kittens, you should probably find a new job." Quote, "But there are no strangers, children," Alice countered. "How are any of them any worse than our own, whom we'll all have someday?" "If you don't understand that," her husband said wearily, "there's no point in explaining it to you. I think I made it clear. No foster children, and that's not up for discussion." Quote, so she didn't discuss it with him. She did it all herself. She probably wouldn't have even decided to do it if she hadn't been told a terrible secret just a few months ago. She couldn't have children of her own, so adoption was her only option. And Alice hoped that, upon seeing Serioza, her husband would no longer talk about other people's children, but would love the boy as much as she had loved him. "What's this anyway?" Alexei asked indignantly. "My word in my own house means nothing anymore." "Listen, don't make a scene in front of the child," Alice hissed at her husband. "He actually hears and understands everything. He's not a little boy anymore. We can discuss this later, when I take Serioza to his room." Quote, "Serioza doesn't have his room here," Alexei snorted. "He has nothing here at all. And he himself shouldn't be here. I've told you this more than once. So if anyone is to blame that the child has to listen to all this, it's you." "Lyosha, please calm down," she asked tiredly. "He's already here, and you can't bring him back. I'm sure you'll be friends. He's good, isn't he? I don't care. Good or bad, it doesn't matter. I've told you 100 times, I won't allow you to bring strange children into the house. You can at least just throw the kitten out, but what to do with this one now? You can't." Suddenly, a boy interrupted the conversation. His voice rang with rage. "What?" Alexei was either indignant at such an unceremonious intrusion into the dialogue, or was simply surprised that this boy dared to speak up. "You can't throw out kittens," he firmly said Serioza. "And no children either, no one at all. Elisa Nikolaevna, I don't like this guy." "I think you'll still find a common language," she stammered. In reality, they had never experienced such confidence. "Boys, you just need a little time." "Where is my room?" Quote, Serioza asked. His voice was shaking, and Elisa realized with horror that the boy was about to burst into tears. He was literally holding back with his last bit of strength to prevent this from happening. Ignoring her husband's further statements, she took him to the nursery and was surprised herself how she managed to prepare a separate room without Alexei noticing it. However, lately he was rarely at home and, in general, was not very attentive to what was happening in his apartment, but also with his own wife. So Elisa awkwardly waved at the small room where Serioza was now to live. "Make yourself comfortable. It's not nice, of course, but it's all yours. It's certainly better than a shared bedroom in an orphanage. Really, it's better, Serioza muttered in such a tone as if he thought the exact opposite. The next hour became a real nightmare for Elisa. Her husband buried himself in his computer monitor and pretended that she didn't exist at all. He didn't answer questions, he ignored all attempts to talk, sat and played some stupid shooter game. An unpleasant thought even crossed his mind that he was using it to vent the aggression he felt either towards his wife or his son. Things weren't much better with Serioza. He certainly didn't ignore Elisa, but he answered everything in monosyllables. He refused to eat, play, or even go for a walk. He sat huddled in a corner, looking so miserable, as if he really would have been better off staying in an orphanage. He categorically didn't want to leave the room. Elisa no longer knew what to do to establish contact with any of them. Well, ideally, she would have reconciled her husband and son altogether. Well, at least get them to talk to each other normally. And when she was completely desperate, the doorbell rang. Lyudmila Mikhailovna was standing on the threshold, and, from her daughter-in-law's upset face, she must have immediately realized that something was wrong. Not so, but she didn't show it. She greeted him politely and asked if her son was home. Elisa nodded absent-mindedly and invited her mother-in-law to come into the apartment. "Oh, Mom." Alexei finally deigned to get up from the computer. "And you're just in time. Elisa did something so funny here, you can't even imagine. Actually, it's impolite to talk about a person in the third person when he's standing right in front of you." His mother pulled him back. "What are you two arguing about again over some nonsense?" "Wow, nonsense," Alexei snorted. "Actually, she dragged a child into the house without consulting me, can you imagine? And she said that now he will live with us." The mother-in-law threw up her hands at the child. "And where is he? Why didn't you tell me anything? Is it a boy or a girl? What's his name? How old is he? Come on, let's meet Grandma." "Mom, can't you hear it all? She didn't even say anything to me," Alexei muttered offendedly. "His name is Serioza." Alice spoke to him at the same time. "He hid in his room and does not want to come out, because, you see, he did not like Lyosha." "How did he not like you?" Lyudmila Mikhailovna was indignant. "Well, how can you not like a child? Children are happiness. Your own children are happiness," the son stubbornly declared. "And other people's? And especially those who appear out of the blue." "Don't talk nonsense," the mother waved him off. "There are no other people's children. You need to be friends with him, Lyosha. But in the end, it is not his fault if his new parents have some disagreements. This should not affect him." And with these words, she resolutely went to the nursery. Here both spouses protested. Alexei was unhappy that his mother took the side of his wife. Alice, in turn, was afraid that after her husband's unfriendly behavior, the last thing the boy needed was communication with some unfamiliar adults. Lyudmila Mikhailovna didn't listen to anyone, but simply entered the room and closed the door behind her. At first, only her mother-in-law's gentle voice could be heard from behind it. But after a few minutes, Serioza responded to her, and very soon they began a rather lively dialogue. Alexei walked around sulking, but at least he no longer showed open hostility towards the child. The reason for this, of course, was his mother, who had given him a serious educational talk. Serioza himself, however, also tried to keep a low profile and avoid showing himself unnecessarily to his adoptive father. Elisa exhaled. Now she began to think again that sooner or later her boys would finally be able to find a common language. but it would probably take a little longer. And yet, the feeling that it was fundamentally impossible disappeared. Besides, now she had his mother-in-law's support. Seriously, little by little he began to settle in, and Elisa began to often notice him sitting at the table in the kitchen. At first, it seemed to her that he was simply staring into space and thinking about something of his own, but soon she understood. His gaze was directed at an old family photograph hanging on the wall. This picture depicted Alexei as a very young child. Next to him were his parents. His father, smiling, was hugging his equally pleased mother. Elisa herself did not know Pavel Viktorovich. He disappeared long before she met her future husband. He went on a business trip and disappeared. Lyudmila Mikhailovna told her once. At first she hoped, looked, but now I understand. Most likely, it was useless even then. I think he is not alive. I would not lose hope, Elisa told her then. But you never know what could have happened. Maybe everything is fine, maybe he will even show up someday. Well, yes, snorted the mother-in-law. A brick fell on my head and I lost my memory. Yeah, no, I don't believe that. I think anything is possible, Alice said stubbornly. Not that she really believed it herself, but rather just wanted to cheer up Lyudmila Mikhailovna, who even after all these years clearly had warm feelings for her husband and was tormented by the fact that she knew nothing about his fate. And now, having carefully observed Seryoza, Alice realized that he was looking not just at a photograph, but specifically at Pavel Viktorovich. He looked for a long time, intently, as if this man seemed vaguely familiar to him. Something interesting in the photograph? One day, Alice decided that it would be best to ask directly. Are you looking at it that carefully? And this man, Seryoza, pointed his finger at the smiling portrait of Pavel Viktorovich. This is Uncle Lesha's dad, right? Well, yes, Alice confirmed, somewhat surprised. Strange, the boy muttered. I think I know him. True, he's not the same now as here. He's already become quite the grandfather. I think he looks very much like him. And where did you meet him? Elisa asked cautiously. Yes, he works as a janitor, not far from the orphanage, replied Seryoza. Just don't get angry. The kids and I used to run away from time to time, you know, to kick a ball around with the local boys. And that's how it is. Quote. Elisa smiled. Well, of course, she knew about this habit of her charges, but she turned a blind eye to it. What's wrong with children socializing? It's good for them to see another world. After all, sooner or later it will be waiting for them beyond the walls of the orphanage. So what's the point of yelling at you now? She chuckled. We're not in an orphanage. So what's with this grandfather? There are plenty of janitors anyway. Why did you remember him in particular? Well, he did tell me they were supposed to take me away soon, Seryoza explained. And anyway, whenever he saw me, he kept asking, how am I doing? Are they bullying me? Quote. Elisa realized she didn't understand anything at all. Was this janitor really her husband's missing father? And why was he so interested in Seryoza? Why did he even say that? Well, it wasn't like he was planning to adopt a child himself. And Elisa decided she had to clear everything up. And first of all, to do this, it was worth talking to that same janitor, at least to understand if he really was Alexei's father. Having clarified which courtyard they were talking about, Elisa went there, but didn't find the janitor. When he didn't show up for a few more days, she went to the housing office, pretending to be an angry resident who was unhappy with the long absence of cleaning. Well, what can we do? They answered her. He is seriously ill, now in the hospital. There are no extra people. Maybe, by the way, you yourself want to earn some extra money? No, that's why I thought so too. You know, for some reason no one wants to. That's because people need to be paid normally, muttered Alice. And in which hospital? Maybe he needs help? The dispatcher, apparently, was glad of any opportunity to get rid of the annoying lady, so without any doubt, she gave her the address. Inspired by the first, albeit insignificant, success, Alice immediately went there. She stood near the bed and peered closely into the man's face, trying to understand whether it was he or not. Some resemblance in the features seemed to be traced, but she did not know him personally and saw only in a photograph, and besides, it was taken a long time ago. Perhaps, if her mother-in-law was here, she would immediately understand everything, but she did not want to involve her in all this. What did you want? Unexpectedly the patient inquired. Quote, Hello, Pavel Viktorovich, but it was Alice who said good luck. She understood that even if it really was Alexei's father, he was now using a completely different name. She just wanted to see his reaction, and it told her everything she needed to know. He visibly flinched, his eyes darting around. It became clear the name was familiar to him, and she had almost no doubt it was him. But now he's seriously scared, realizing that the past has somehow caught up with him. Quote, You're mistaken, he croaked. I'm not Pavel Viktorovich. Too bad. Alice shook her head. Otherwise, Lyudmila Mikhailovna and her son Lyosha are looking for him. Maybe I should invite them here so they can see for themselves that it wasn't you. What, are you working for them? Pavel Viktorovich asked vaguely. After so many years, you decided to track me down? No, Lisa shook her head and wanted to add something else, but the man interrupted her. Then what do you want from me, huh? You know perfectly well that I work as a simple janitor. There's nothing to take from me, so there's no point in blackmailing me. I wasn't going to. Quote. Alice shook her head again. I'm your son's wife. And it so happened that we adopted Seryoza. And he recognized you in a family photo. He said that you promised him that he would be taken away soon. That's why I want to get to the bottom of this whole story. My Lyosha adopted Seryoza, Pavel Viktorovich was surprised. Well, what a fate, in a word. And what about you, so, are you still connected with Seryoza? Alice asked. The man looked at her for a long time in silence, then sighed heavily, opened his mouth several times, as if he wanted to say something, but did not dare. And she sat and did not rush, understanding that, perhaps, it was not easy for him to make this decision. And finally the janitor spoke. Okay, I'll just tell you this. Promise that Ludochka will not find out anything about this. It is better for her to think that I died or vanished without a trace. That way, it will probably be better for everyone. Okay, Alice nodded, realizing that otherwise she would achieve nothing at all. I will not tell her unless you yourself suddenly decide to tell her. Anyway, with another sigh, Pavel Viktorovich began. The story is banal. I met another woman, and we started living together. We had a son. But, as you probably already guessed, I was afraid to tell my first wife about it. You can laugh, but I was ashamed to go and somehow explain all this. After all, we had a child too. So you decided to stage his disappearance? Yes, I decided, he nodded. Change my documents and everything else. I thought, well, it's better to let them think I'm dead than no. How terrible a person am I? Yeah, I don't agree that this is a good decision, Elisa noted. But what does Serioza have to do with it? Well, the thing is, he's the boy's father, Pavel Viktorovich said slowly. He's my second son. And now he's in prison. He's served almost 9 years, but they're supposed to release him on parole soon. And I'm sure as soon as he's free, he'll want to take his child back. And what did he do? Elisa breathed out in horror. Why so much for? For murder. Pavel Viktorovich said quietly, looking away. But Dima didn't commit it. I'm absolutely sure of that. He was framed. How can that be? Elisa was surprised. It's not theft. How can they frame him? As it turned out, it wasn't difficult. But let's take things in order. At first, everything was going great for Dima. He had his own business, small but thriving, and a beautiful wife. In short, everything many people only dream of. And then everything went downhill. His wife died during the 1940s. Dimka, of course, grieved for her. At first, he didn't think about any women at all, but some time passed, and he had Katerina. Pavel Viktorovich winced at the mention of that name. Quote, "Didn't you like her?" asked Elisa. "Absolutely not. I could see she only wanted money from Dima. I even told him so, and he just laughed. He replied that he wasn't marrying her for love either, that he just needed someone to look after the child. I offered to hire a nanny, but he said, I don't want one. Why leave an earring to a stranger? After all, he'd have a wife right there." Quote, "Yes, it's strange, of course," Elisa snorted. "Yes, that's exactly it," Pavel Viktorovich agreed. "That's what I told him too. But I was in such a state, and still reeling from the death of his wife. Basically, he didn't really understand what he was doing or what had happened. His Katyuka had disappeared, and with her, all of Dima's savings. We, of course, went to the police, and they seemed to have found the place where she was killed. There was blood, some of Dima's personal belongings, and the body, by the way, was never found, but they didn't really investigate. The evidence was ultimately only circumstantial, but they said that my son had a fight with his wife and killed her, and then allegedly hid the body somewhere and staged the disappearance." "Wow," Elisa muttered in horror. "Exactly," Pavel Viktorovich nodded. "Serioza ended up in an orphanage. And why didn't you take him?" Elisa asked in surprise. "You're a close relative." "Hey, my wife couldn't handle what happened to Dima. She had a heart attack. And I really couldn't bear to look after the child. I lost my job then, and only managed to find work as a janitor later. In short, I had neither the strength nor the money to raise him. I kept expecting Dimka to come out and take him away. But I adopted him," Elisa reminded me with some vague regret. "I get that, but that's not bad either," Pavel Viktorovich nodded. "So it turns out my Leoshka will now be raising his nephew, although he doesn't even realize it." Quote, "And if he had realized," Elisa suddenly thought, "would he have reacted differently?" "So it turns out that I have no one left now," Pavel Viktorovich said sadly. "And then there's this illness. I'm afraid I'll never see my son back from the colony." Quote, "Oh, come on," Elisa protested. "We have to fight. Do you want me to come and see you? We hardly know each other, of course, but you're my husband's father, so we're related, and you won't be so lonely." "Oh, I never expected that." "Well, if it works out, I'll be glad," Pavel Viktorovich nodded. Elisa's life had become a continuous treadmill. She ran from work to the hospital, then home, and then, before she could blink, it was morning again. It was hard to predict how long she could maintain such a crazy pace. At least Lyudmila Mikhailovna, who had become genuinely attached to Seryoza, came regularly to babysit him. Alexei preferred to pretend the child didn't exist. And sometimes she really wanted to open his eyes to the terrible way he treated his own nephew. But Elisa kept her word, even though she sometimes tried to convince Pavel Viktorovich that it would be better to tell his family that he was alive, but the janitor, terribly ashamed of his actions, refused. However, Elisa did not lose hope. One day, when she arrived at work, she found her charges in a strange, depressed mood. She tried for a long time to figure out what had happened. The boys were not used to complaining, but finally one of them, embarrassed and looking away, said, "Breakfast was somehow strange, as if the portions had become smaller and the porridge was somehow thin. We weren't full. Wow, maybe they mixed something up in the kitchen?" Elisa said thoughtfully. "Don't worry, I'll check." "Just don't tell me it was us who complained," said another boy. "Otherwise, it's like this," Elisa said sternly. "As long as I'm your teacher, I'm responsible for your comfort and won't allow anyone to harm you. Understood?" The children nodded hesitantly. They knew Alice was telling the truth, or at least what she believed to be the truth, but they weren't sure she'd succeed. Alice, meanwhile, went into the kitchen and found it incredibly lively. The cooks and their assistants were already bustling about, preparing for the upcoming dinner. But the teacher, with her experienced eye, noticed something was wrong and almost immediately realized there was no meat in the soup. And the second course also contained some unconvincing and entirely unappetizing-looking bits of something unknown. Quote, "What's wrong?" Alice snapped at the cooks. "Have they decided to starve my children to death, or do we have some kind of supply problems?" "Problems, probably," one of them shrugged. "It's not like we decide that ourselves. We cook whatever we bring. We were also surprised when we saw that." "You should ask the director," the second one supported him. "He's responsible for the supplies." "Okay, I'll ask," Alice declared decisively and headed straight for the office. She knocked on the door and entered without waiting for an answer. And she froze in place. The man sitting behind the director's desk was a complete stranger to her. He himself, however, looked at her with no less surprise. And also with obvious hostility. Quote, "Who are you?" Alice blurted out. "I am Philip Alexandrovich, the new director of this establishment." Easing out his vowels rhythmically, he said, "And who are you and why are you barging into my office without asking?" "And where is the previous director?" Alice asked sharply. "How should I know?" The man shrugged discontentedly. "Transferred somewhere or fired?" "I wouldn't be surprised at all, considering the rules you have here." "Didn't they teach you to at least wait until you're allowed in?" "And what happened to our food?" Alice ignored his question. "Why are they handing out who knows what instead of normal food?" "Funding was cut." A rather unpleasant smirk played on the new director's lips. "What can you do? The poor kids will have to make do with what they have." Alice felt real rage boiling inside her. She already understood what was happening. She could only wonder how he managed to pull it all off so quickly. After all, Just last week everything was fine. It seems to me, she said in a ringing voice, that there's no funding involved. You just seem to have decided that you can pocket the money. The same money that's meant for the children. Who do you have to be to steal from orphans? Quote, what do you want from me? Philip Alexandrovich snorted. Perhaps I should give you a share? Alice was taken aback. It seemed he was asking quite seriously. Well, that is, he really believed that the only reason for her indignation could only be that someone was stealing and not sharing with her. I want, Alice answered sternly, for you to stop profiting from children, otherwise I will quickly gather evidence of what you're doing, and you'll be thrown out of your chair faster than you got in. Understood? Be careful not to be thrown out of yours. Quote. Philip Alexandrovich grinned wickedly. And believe me, if you take matters into your own hands, it will happen very quickly. We'll see about that, Alice responded heatedly. I'm here for these children, the director interrupted her. You should think about more than just the children. You seem to be the same teacher who recently took the child away from here. And do you think he'll be very happy if he has to come back here? I can very quickly find witnesses who will say that you are not fulfilling your maternal responsibilities. Don't even think about threatening my son, Elisa roared. I will get you fired. You are not allowed within cannon shot of the children. I warned you, quote. Everything was just as calm, Philip Alexandrovich responded. The choice is yours. No, can you imagine? Alexei was indignant. Mother turned away from me and supported this hen. And now I am forced to live in the same house not only with her, but also with some foster child. You don't have to live with her, Nastya cooed, clinging to him. You can live with me. How much longer can this go on? Quote. Why don't you get a divorce, even after what happened? You just complain to me all the time about how she's driving you crazy, and you don't change a thing. Darling, Alexei sighed, hugging her tighter. You understand, it's not that simple. We don't share an apartment, we have some savings, and I really wouldn't want her to get half of it in a divorce. And what are you going to do? Nastya pursed her lips. So far, this sounds like some kind of excuse. I don't want to lose my property, that's why I can't get a divorce. Time is running out. What's wrong with you? Alexei kissed her softly. I'm not saying that I'm not going to. I just need a little time. She started coming home from work much later than before. And now I think she's found someone. So what? Nastya was indignant. Are you jealous? Of course not. Alexei was already starting to get irritated by her lack of understanding. Jealousy has nothing to do with it. Just if I can prove she's cheating on me, and there's this whole adoption thing. The court will probably make concessions. I get it now. Yeah, right, Nastya sighed. But would you have rushed it? You know, I'm not going to wait around for you forever. While you're wasting your time, someone more decisive might come along. Quote. She said it playfully, maybe even jokingly, but Alexei had an uneasy feeling that this joke, like any other, was only half joking. He felt like he really should speed up the divorce process. Fortunately, he'd already made some progress along the way. For example, he'd learned that his wife went to the same hospital every day after work. He'd decided something had happened to her lover. And for some reason, he'd been hesitant to test this hypothesis. But now, after her words, he realized he couldn't delay any longer. The next day, he followed Elisa right to the hospital room, then waited for his wife to leave before entering himself. But what he saw froze him in his tracks. He understood everything, realized it all, and realized it. This man couldn't possibly be her lover. Even though they hadn't seen each other for many years, he immediately recognized the older man. And how could he not recognize his own father? Alexei caught his father's frightened gaze and realized he recognized him too. "So, Dad, have you found him?" He himself didn't know what effect he'd hoped for from his words, but certainly not what happened. The elderly man suddenly began wheezing and thrashing around on his bed. It lasted only a few seconds, after which Pavel Viktorovich went quiet. Alexei was even afraid. Had he really died? But the doctors, who suddenly appeared from nowhere, declared, "No, he's just fallen into a coma." Stunned by what had happened, Alexei left the hospital. It was only on the way that he fully realized what had happened, feeling hatred boiling within him, both for his father, whom he thought dead for so many years, and for his wife, who knew but hadn't even thought to tell him. "How could you?" That was the first thing he shouted as he burst into his own apartment. "You've been going to the hospital to see my father for who knows how long and you haven't even told him about it." "How did you find out?" Alice asked, dumbfounded. And this angered Alexei even more. "Followed you," he snapped. "I thought I'd find a lover, but I discovered something far more interesting." "How did you even find him?" "You know, he asked me not to tell you and his mother anything," Alice replied, confused. "She found him through Serioza. It's a long story, but in the end, this boy is your nephew, so you see, he's not a stranger at all." Quote. She managed to drag this foster child into this too, Alexei thought with a new outburst of indignation. "Please don't tell your mother," Alice asked. "There's no point in upsetting her unnecessarily." "No way, I won't do what you're saying," her husband replied indignantly. "I'll tell her everything. After all, for so many years she thought that this scoundrel had simply died. Although now he has every chance of ending up in the next world." "How is that possible?" Alice gasped. And just like that, her husband replied with some glee, "He saw me and immediately fell into a coma." Imagine the lengths some people will go to avoid explaining to their own families. Quote. While Alice was digesting this information, Alexei actually dialed his mother's number and described everything in detail, not forgetting to say that Alice had found him first. But for some reason, he decided not to mention the detail about Serioza, his relative. Lyudmila Mikhailovna, however, didn't react to the news the way her son expected. It seemed she was only concerned about one thing, that her runaway husband was in a coma. And she said she was going to visit him and care for him, despite Alexei trying to dissuade her from doing so. "Okay, let's do it again," the husband said slowly. "My father had a second family. And this boy you brought in is the son of his other child. Is that right?" "Yes," Alice nodded. "Serioza, your brother's son." "You shouldn't call him that," Alexei winced. "He killed someone and is now in prison. I don't need brothers like that." "He didn't kill anyone," Alice was indignant. "Yeah, that's what Daddy thinks," Alexei snorted. "And you know, I don't really trust his words. But in any case, what does that change? Besides the fact that it turns out you brought into the house not just any child, but a son, a criminal, and a grandson. By that logic, Alice flared up, you yourself are the son of a traitor. You kept saying that you didn't want to raise someone else's child. Well, I just explained to you, Serioza is not a stranger to you. Yeah. Only much worse, as it turned out, Alexei muttered. It would have been better if it had been true. It was unclear whose it was. And what had the child done wrong? Unable to contain herself, Alice raised her voice. He's a good boy, intelligent. And this squabble could have continued for a very long time, but was interrupted by the doorbell. Alice, although a little surprised, didn't even bother to look through the peephole. True, they weren't expecting anyone, but Lyudmila Mikhailovna had a habit of showing up unannounced. And now Alice also hoped that it was her mother-in-law on the other side of the door. However, it wasn't Lyudmila Mikhailovna standing there, and Alice even cried out in surprise, not immediately realizing who exactly she was seeing. She was looking at the young man, who seemed to have stepped out of an old photograph, the very same family photograph of her husband that still hung in the kitchen. Hello, he said. I, Dmitri, learned that my son is now with you. I would like to see him. Quote, hello, Alice answered, dumbfounded. You look so much like his father. Look, I know your story, but I won't give you the child. He doesn't even remember you for sure, and he's been under a lot of stress lately. And forgive my frankness, but I'm not at all sure how good a father you will be for him. I understand everything too. The guest said softly. Quote, and I'm not asking you to give him to me right now. I just wanted to see him, maybe he would want to talk to me. I know that it was you who looked after him for most of the time that I couldn't do this. And I am very grateful to you. And certainly not going to act without your approval. Okay then. Alice tried to smile. Come in. I'll call Serioza now, if he wants to see you. No, Alexei's stern voice came from behind her. No one will come here. I don't need a criminal in my house. Even if his son lives here and even if he himself is my father's son. Are you talking about that father you almost drove to the grave a few days ago? Dmitri responded indignantly. Keep in mind, I may be a criminal, but I didn't kill anyone. But my father's death, if he doesn't dig himself out, will be on your conscience. Get out of here, you know where, Alexei growled. And don't even think about showing up here again. I don't want to see you, and the child has no reason to communicate with you. Dmitri, measuring his brother with a contemptuous look, turned around and left. Elisa turned angrily to her husband. More than anything in the world, she wanted to slap him hard. Not only did he not want to be a father to Serioza, but now he wants to deprive the child of a real dad. Quote, I don't need criminals in the house, Alexei repeated before she could say anything. Let him take his puppy if he needs him so much. But he won't be on my property. How could I even marry you? Quote, Alice said. They didn't speak for the rest of the day. They just glanced at each other from different angles with displeasure. Each believed that he was right in this situation. And not only in this one. Both understood that there was no hope for reconciliation between them. Alice went to sleep on the kitchen sofa, and in the morning it was discovered that Serioza had disappeared. He was not in the apartment, nor in the surrounding courtyards. Alexei seemed not to care. Alice even suspected that her husband was secretly glad that he managed to get rid of the child so easily. But she was not going to sit idly by and raised almost the entire city to the storm. Everyone who was free at that moment was looking for the boy, except, of course, Alexei. Alice herself, she was running around, looking over the same places for the 100th time. She screamed his name at the top of her lungs, but still got no answer. And then such a simple thought occurred to her that she was surprised. How could she not have thought of it before? After all, she knew the address of the apartment where Pavel Viktorovich lived. She even went there to bring him some things to the hospital. And that was the only place his youngest son could be now. What if Seryoza overheard their argument and decided to run away to his real father? That's what happened. As it turned out, Seryoza even remembered his dad a little. I wanted to take him to you, but he wouldn't do it, Dmitri explained, a little embarrassed. He said he didn't want to see my brother. I don't want to, the boy stubbornly confirmed. Maybe you'd better stay with us, Mom? Alice burst into tears. It was the first time he called her that. But why under such terrible circumstances? Dmitri was silent. It was obvious that he was embarrassed, but at the same time, he seemed to agree with his son. That same evening, when she returned home, wondering what to do, her disgruntled husband met her at the door. Well, haven't found your puppy? He asked mockingly. If you call him that again, I'll hit you, she said seriously. Don't worry, I didn't drink anymore, her husband said sarcastically, throwing a tightly packed bag at her. What is this? Alice asked. Your clothes, which I also don't want to see in my apartment anymore, Alexei explained. Just like you and that foster child. Let him go back to the orphanage, and you go wherever you want. I'm filing for divorce, quote. Alice didn't answer. She didn't have the strength, and she didn't see the point. Having little understanding of what she was doing, the woman went back to Dmitri. He, of course, was surprised by her appearance, but upon learning what had happened, he let her into his house. Seryoshka, by all appearances, was incredibly happy that everything turned out this way. Don't worry, Alice said when the boy couldn't hear them. I won't be able to support myself for long. Tomorrow I'll start looking for a rented apartment. Don't worry about it, he responded. Live as long as you need. You're not bothering me, and Seryoshka is generally happy. And I'm glad he's here. You'll take him when you move out, after all. Well, I certainly won't interfere with your communication, Alice smiled sadly. But the next day, something incredible happened. Philip Alexandrovich decided not to wait for the moment when Alice actually did something against him. So, when she came to work, she learned of her own dismissal. Alice understood that she couldn't even challenge this decision. Strictly, formally, everything was fair. It is impossible to work somewhere strictly adhering to all the points of the job description. Intentionally or unintentionally, something has to be broken. This could always be taken advantage of by the management, whom she somehow displeased. We should help you get settled, she said to Dima with exaggerated cheerfulness when she returned home. You were gone for 10 years, and the world has changed a lot in that time. Quote, yes, he nodded. Frankly speaking, I could use some help. Well, and maybe I can do something for you. Quote. Alice only laughed incredulously. Well, what could he do for her? While Alice was bringing the apartment into some kind of order, Dmitri decided to visit the director of the orphanage, and he himself did not know what he wanted to achieve. He was driven exclusively by a heightened sense of justice. And it so happened that he showed up in Philip Alexandrovich's office at the wrong time for the boss himself. The director was busy arguing heatedly with his wife about something. And only after looking at her, Dmitri felt his back break out in a cold sweat. He recognized this woman and could only croak out, "Katya." She turned to the door, and horror was reflected in her eyes. She, too, without a doubt, recognized him, her ex-husband, whom she robbed and effectively sent to prison almost 10 years ago. As it turned out, Elisa hadn't been idle either. She had managed to gather some evidence of Philip Alexandrovich's illegal activities. She would have liked more, of course, but she had to work with what she had. However, as the court showed, that was more than enough. The director of the orphanage and his wife went first to the dock, and then to prison. Philip Alexandrovich's place, however, was rightfully given to Elisa. She was incredibly happy, and not even because of the promotion, but because she now had many more opportunities to make life easier for the children. After Katerina's arrest, Dmitri managed to have his criminal record expunged, fully rehabilitated, and also receive a refund, including compensation for emotional distress. Soon after, he proposed to Elisa. She accepted. The divorce proceedings with Alexei were in full swing. But more than anyone, he was excited about the upcoming wedding. Of course, Seryoza. In the wake of all this good news, Pavel Viktorovich had also regained consciousness. And not just regained consciousness, but was rapidly improving. Elisa suspected that Lyudmila Mikhailovna, who continued to visit him, had contributed significantly to this. And, apparently, despite their age, the couple had decided to renew their relationship. As for Alexei, Nastia didn't live to see his divorce. She left him for another man. Rumor had it he was richer. As a result of the divorce, he had to sell his apartment and give half to his wife. In the end, he bought himself only a room in a communal apartment and was left with nothing, completely alone. Even his own mother considered this a fair punishment. But Elisa and Dmitri got married and began raising Seryoza, now their son, together. And his grandparents helped them with this. If you like this story, I hope you'll support me with a thumbs up button. All the best, M.